was no one like you. You would rip apart the clouds in all my dreams. Others all fade away.
Welcome everyone to the Seeds of Innovation webinar. It's great to have you with us today. My name is Kate Fitzherbert and I'm Science Manager at Bush Heritage. I've been with Bush Heritage now for around 2 decades and I've watched the organisation grow from being a small, ambitious and somewhat manic organisation with 12 staff to being what it is today, which is an organisation, one of Australia's premier conservation organisations, with a staff of over 100 people, and we're helping to protect more than 11 million hectares of land. And that's been an extraordinary journey, and it's been a real privilege to be part of that journey. Working in the conservation space is incredibly rewarding, but it also throws some serious challenges at you. And I think that climate change is probably the largest challenge we have faced and we probably will ever face. And it's going to test us. It's going to call on us to be innovative and bold in the things that we do. But we have to try what we can to protect the ecosystems and species that we love so much in Australia. And that's not to say that there aren't lots of things we can do that aren't going to be effective. But we need to try things and we need to be prepared for some of them to fail, but we need to be innovative and we need to be bold. Today, you're going to hear about one of these innovative ideas at Nardoo Hills Reserve in Victoria, where we're already starting to see some of the impacts of climate change on the grassy woodlands there, with some quite severe impacts on the trees. What we are trying to do with this project is to trial a new way of restoring the ecological function of ecosystems affected by climate change. There's a great saying that extremity is also an opportunity, and I really believe this is the case with climate change. And there's so much that we can do to protect the environment, and I'm really excited to see what comes out of the conservation sector in the next few years. My sort of hope for this year is to see the community come together, to see conservation sector come together with agriculture, with government, with mining, with corporations, to really set a path forward for how we can work together for the next few decades to protect nature. So today I'm on Wurundjeri country, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands that we're on today, and just to acknowledge and to recognise that and show our respect for the enduring relationship that our traditional owners have with their lands and waters, and to pass on respect for their elders past, present and emerging. And it's I'd invite you all to use the chat box to put, if you know the name of the traditional lands that you're on today, why not pop it into the chat box? Because it's a lovely thing to see all those names come up on the chat and to realise how far flung around Australia we all are. Soon I'm going to introduce our speaker, Dr. Matt Appleby, who is a senior ecologist with Bush Heritage and has responsibility for the southeast region, along with his regional ecologists. And he's going to join us today to chat about their really innovative approach to this recovery of the grassy woodlands at Nardoo Hills. We'll open up after that with your questions, and we're really keen to get your questions. Today, I mean, quite a number of you will have probably read a little bit about this project on the website or in the newsletter, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper today, but we won't be able to cover everything. So if you have questions about this project that you want to pose to us, please put them into the Q&A function on the web. You should have a little Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And it's just a matter of typing in your question to that, and then that will come through to us through the system. And if you've got any general comments you want to make throughout or observations you want to make, please put them into the chat. It's lovely to see those come through. And also, if you get sort of stuck up on the technical side, if you can email events@bushheritage.org.au, then our tech team will be there to give you some. Just to let you know too that we're actually recording this webinar, and in the next few days we will be forwarding through, I think it's the link through to you, so that you have it there in your inbox. Most of you will know that Bush Heritage is an organisation that buys and manages land, and also partners with Aboriginal partners, with farmers, with universities, with governments, so that together we can work to protect these amazing landscapes that we love and the irreplaceable species of Australia. Our purpose is to bring the bush back to good health, and we do this through all the natural resource management work that we do on our reserves and the support that we give our partners, working with them on their land. Together, the reserves and our properties owned by partners protect threatened ecosystems and species, around 6,700 species, and of those around 226 are federally listed as threatened. So we are making a contribution to protecting our wonderful landscapes and our species. So what I'll do now is to introduce Matt. Matt Appleby is a botanist. He's based in Tasmania and has been working with Bush Heritage for nearly 14 years. As a senior ecologist with us, he has the responsibility for supporting the regional ecologists, but also for overseeing all the research on our 3 southern states, that's Tasmania, Victoria and New South Wales. So welcome, Matt.
Hi, how are you? Good to see everyone.
It's great to have you here, and thanks for making the time to join us today. Today, we're going to be framing our conversation around the reality of climate change and the impacts that we're already seeing. And probably many of you will have noticed things changing in your local area, in your parks, maybe even in your garden. Maybe there are species arriving earlier than expected, or migratory species, or maybe new species entirely are turning up, like we've just had koals here in just east of Melbourne, which is not what we expect. Maybe the fruit in your gardens is ripening sooner. But you also might be seeing some things which are a little bit more disturbing, like the decline or death of trees. We're certainly experiencing that here. And if that's of something that's of interest to you, there's a something that you can do to get onto a website which will pop up on the chat called the help me, Matt, the Dead Tree
Dead
Detective.
tree. Yeah, that's it.
That's right. Which is they're encouraging the community to get onto the website and to record where and which species, I think, of trees they're seeing are dying. And it's a way of the government helping, trying to sort of get the an idea of the impacts across the landscape. Some of the changes that we're seeing in the landscape are really severe, and the fires of last summer are a classic example. And many of you will probably remember the terrible die-off of the grey-headed flying fox in East Gippsland, where half the population died over a period of, I think, 2 days or so when we had some really extreme heat. But many of the changes that we're seeing in the landscape are also more subtle, but they're happening all around us. And as conservation land managers, bush heritage ecologists like Matt and our reserve managers are watching these changes, and they're planning around those changes. And we're starting to think in new ways and innovative ways about how we can help our ecosystems to come through not only the extreme events, but also those incremental changes that will happen as temperatures increase. And in southern Australia, anyway, that we're going to get reduced rainfall. So we've got a terrific team of people who are doing lots of really creative thinking. And we're going to talk about one of these projects today, which is actually really exciting. And I don't know, Matt will be able to tell us this, whether it has been trialled elsewhere in Australia. But
yeah, it has been.
It has. Oh, okay. So anyway, this is Bush Heritage's first attempt at this, and what we're trying to do is to rebuild the ecological function of this grassy woodland, which has suffered from the impacts of drought and intense heat. So as a way to start, I'm just going to invite Matt to give you a bit of a word picture about what Nardoo Hills was like when we first purchased it back, or the first of the Nardoo Hills cluster of properties we purchased in 2004. So Matt, can you draw us a picture in words?
Yeah, so this is a grassy woodland, so it's very open sort of country. The main species there are the grey box and the yellow box trees. These communities that occur there are both listed under the federal government's threatened species threatened communities legislation, the EPBC Act. So they're very important. So one of those is critically endangered. The other one's an endangered community. So at the very high risk. These grassy woodlands used to be very extensive. So like 97% of them have been cleared, and they occur on those sort of inland slopes from sort of near the Grampians, basically up into almost to the Queensland border on the inland slopes there. So at Nardoo Hills, when we purchased it, it had some, obviously the picture you see here, some beautiful big old growth trees with hollows in them. But we also had a good range of different age types as well. So we had good recruitment going on there. In the understory, it's largely dominated by grasses, things like kangaroo grass, the one you can see in the photograph, and spear grasses, things like that. But probably the most spectacular part of it is the herbs that grow in amongst those grasses too. So things like chocolate lilies, bulbine or rock lilies, paper daisies, so everlastings and things like that as well. And we've even got a couple of really quite threatened orchids there. In fact, one was thought to be extinct only Oh gosh, it's stretching the memory. Only about 10 years ago, I think it was thought to be extinct. So it's really important, great condition property. Um, the orchid, as I mentioned, so there's the robust green hood and also the northern golden moth orchid there. They've been flourishing since we purchased the property. We keep finding populations dotted around the place there too. But it's also really good habitat. These grassy woodlands are fantastic habitat for a suite of bird species too, which are associated with the woodlands. And these, in Victoria at least, and well, actually more widespread than that. They're declining right across the country in the woodlands. So things like the hooded robin, scarlet robin, diamond firetail, a range of different honey eaters. Oh gosh, I'm going to forget all the names. Black chin. I think we've got brown-headed fuscus and another one which I've forgotten, as well as things like tree creepers too. So that's basically sort of gives you a bit of an idea of what's on the property.
That's great. Thanks. Yes, I remember going up there really early on, and it just blew me
Yeah,
away. It was such a beautiful woodland. So,
yeah.
and just so explain for us, Matt, what happened to that woodland following the drought and that really intense heat, which happened in 2008 and then again in 2014.
Yeah, so it was there were the rainfall at Nardoo, the Wedderburn area, is about 470 odd mils of rain. Hard to believe, but it's that high. But we in the last sort of 10 years we sort of barely get out of the 300 mil sort of range. But prior to 2008 and prior to 2014, there was several years, about 3 years at least, in that sort of 300 mil range. But what really I think impacted, we've had drought there before. What was different, I think, in those 2 years is there were some very severe heat wave conditions. So we normally get in that area about 5 days or less in the 40s, in the 40-degree mark. In those 2 years, we got double that number. And what happened is that basically very high, not the 30s into the 40s for an entire week. And I think that heat shock plus the drought conditions really knocked about the trees. So as you can see in the picture, big old trees died, but young ones as well, saplings right down to the seedlings. So it occurred in particular areas on the reserve. So they tended to be areas which are, well, without digging a huge hole, I think they're on the sort of shallower soils. They're not always on the northern aspects of the hills there, but I think it's got a lot to do with the sort of shallower soils. Um,
And what was the impact of that on the woodland birds and animals of all that tree death?
yeah, so what I think is happening there is uh, obviously there's a lack of the trees are basically shedding their canopy. In some cases, they were able to re-sprout, so there's a bit of coppicing going on there. But the and re-sprouting on the trunk as well. But largely, the canopy's dead or dying on those trees. And so things like the tree creepers, you've got bark peeling off the tree. There's not going to be much food left for species like that once that bark peels off, once that tree is dead. So it's going to have severe cascading effects, so that it impacts on the insects that those birds eat, and therefore on those birds, and so on up the food chain too. So to the raptors and things that then feed on those woodland birds too. So I think there'll be a cascade of effects basically that
Yeah.
can also affect the ground cover as well.
And does that cascading effect sort of go as far as the soil? Is the soil impacted as well by the loss of those
Yeah,
trees?
almost certainly. So the lack of shade means that the soil will heat up, and so as it heats up, that's going to just kill some of the microbes that are in the soil. So some of the macroinvertebrates and any invertebrates that are in that soil, as well as things that might be of benefit to the plants, like mycorrhizal fungi might struggle more with that hotter soil. It also means that soil will dry out faster too, and infiltration will most likely be lower too. So it's going to be a real double whammy, I suppose, as a result of that. So the water table won't replenish quite as easily. There'll be increased runoff potentially too. So it's, yeah, big effects.
Yeah, quite severe. So the idea of trying to make this woodland more resilient and bringing back that ecological function. So where did that idea come from?
Yeah, so at first we sort of thought about, my first thoughts were, well, okay, these grey box are dying and some of the yellow box at that stage were dying. Okay, what's the next hardiest species that grows locally in this area? What could we potentially replant on those areas? So my thoughts were immediately went to the mallee that's right next door. So there's green mallee and other species that occur there. But funnily enough, I actually found areas where there was dieback of grey box and where it meets the green mallee, and the green mallee weren't looking all that good either. So that potentially ruled that out. But there are also consequences of obviously changing from one species to another. So in some cases, the benefits of planting an alternative species might not be outweighed by the downside. So things like they might flower at different times, and so different species don't get what they used to get out of, say, the grey box and yellow box. So if the nectar is not available at the right times as the particular honey eaters are moving through that area, they'll have consequences. So the idea, I suppose, the next idea sort of came along when a volunteer, Gary McDonald, came to Bush Heritage with a similar problem. He owns a property up in the Strathbogies in Victoria, and there's a lot of dieback there with the stringy barks, red stringy barks, up that way. So we put our heads together and sort of came up with uh, well, to set about setting up a project and to look into it a bit more. So we looked at, we started off doing some work on sort of species modelling, looking at species distributions for these two key species. We looked at climate projections as well, and we realised that in north central Victoria, both those species are really at the edge of their distributions. Once you sort of go into the Wimmera, they basically disappear from that sort of area. But the distribution models and sort of climate data showed us that there are locations where grey box and yellow box occur that are actually drier and hotter than Nardoo Hills. So it gave us an idea that had also been raised by people at CSIRO and various universities to try a technique which is called climate adjusted provenancing to guide the revegetation that we do in these woodlands. So that involves the same species. We don't replace it with a different species. We use the same species. You still revegetate using the local provenance, but you go and collect seed from provenances outside that local area. So a provenance is just a different region, and there are often distinct differences between the provenances of the same species. So grey box and yellow box have got very wide distributions across Victoria, well, into South Australia and up into, I think, right up into Queensland as well, so through New South Wales. And this particular technique, the climate adjusted one, means that you don't just choose all provenances of those species. You actually bias it towards where you think the climate is heading for that for that area. So that's what that basically means, that climate adjusted provenancing.
So this is actually quite a complex thing. Can you take us through how you planned and implemented this? Because looking at that picture of Gary McDonald with his plants, and everyone has a label, that indicates that this is a fairly complex process to go through to get it right. Can you explain to us how you went about that?
Yeah, so we initially, after we'd sort of done that preliminary work, we went back to those experts who came up with these ideas at CSIRO. And when I sort of said that people are already running this type of experiment, this type of planting, very few. It's not many, and they're very young as well. So they're just one of the first to start this too. So there's not a lot of data out there, but there's some very good minds behind this. Linda Broadhurst, Sue Prober, Martin Breed, and other people like that, all working in this area. So we discussed with them our ideas and you know, how many provenances do we need? How many should we test? How many trees of each plant of each provenance do we need? All those sorts of nitty gritty things. And so, yes, when you come back to looking at those seedlings with Gary there, there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of information on those things, right down to the actual. We can actually go back to the plant that, pardon me, the actual plant that we got the seed from, if we need to. So that there's a lot of information stored there. But we utilised a lot of tools which are now coming, which were just only just available. So things like the climate analog tool, and we also use the Australian Virtual Herbarium. That the climate analog tool is a way to look at the climate projections, I suppose, projections for an area. So in this particular case, on the map you can see on the left-hand side, the location we chose is north central Victoria, and you're not given a lot of choices. So it's Warwick, Nabil, or Bendigo are the two closest to Nardoo Hills, so the Wedderburn area. So you choose that, and you look at the different scenarios that are out there. That you can select. So there's it's a best case scenario of where we reduce our carbon emissions tomorrow. There's another scenario where there's a continuation of the increase in carbon emissions, but then a rapid uptake of, say, renewables and carbon decreases. But there's also the sort of the business as usual, which unfortunately is what we're tracking against at the moment. And the climate analogs tool also allows you to put in different projection outlook time periods too, so out to 2050 or to 2090. And so we used a variety of those combination of those things to look at, but we basically used either not the best case scenario, but the middle road, and probably the least and as I said, the current sort of trajectory we're on it as well. But we looked at 2050 as well as 2090, and so based on that, the map on the other side, the right hand side there, shows you the different areas where we collected seed from, the different provenances that we selected. And so there's three different scenarios there. So the green ones, if you like, are the wetter, cooler sort of ones. So our current site is the dark green, the Nardoo Hills, lighter green for the ones just literally on the border, I guess, of between New South Wales, Victoria, and going right up into that, up into sort of Condobolin and over to Corn, of course, in South Australia too. So on the climate analog tool, that projection that you see there is for our current, the worst case scenario, and out to only 2050. So it highlights the town you can see on that one is Griffith. If you look at the other map, you'll see that Griffith is actually now all moderate and sort of middle ground, I suppose. So it's not the hottest, not the driest. So you can see that when we bumped up that, changed the parameters on that tool, say 2090, that's where things like Condobolin and others come into it. Yeah, so there's a lot of work in it. There was the other critical sort of thing with this is just getting some money too. So we're very grateful to our partners at Greenfleet, who are a carbon offsetting company doing voluntary carbon projects, and also the nursery that they use, Arborline. We very reliant on them for getting this project up and running too. So a lot of planning by them, a lot of help by them as well.
So Matt, those from memory, there's every single one of those little trees is identified individually and barcoded. Can you just explain what that tells us and how that helps us to monitor the outcomes over the next numbers of years or decades?
Yeah, so the each so it's a we have what okay, I'll get technical. So it's a randomized block design that we've set up there. There's 9 blocks for each of the different species. Within that we have what we call plots or sub block areas within that too. So every little plant is got its location. So we know so that label is unique for that particular plant. So we know its species, we know its provenance, we know the family, so the mother tree for that particular plant, and we know which example it is of that. Which number of that particular family as well. So we have about 125 of each family planted out. So about 11,250 plants went in the ground. So it's a lot of barcodes and a lot of monitoring to do to find out. But what it allows us to do is to, when we do that monitoring, we come back and are able to compare growth rates, survival of each of the different provenances. We can look at if there are some effects of where the trees have been planted on the blocks too. So there might be something about some characteristics about the land itself that means these plants do better than in other areas too. So that's why we have that design that goes with that complex experimental design. Not saying that everyone who does this takes this approach has to do an experiment and place it in and go to this sort of level of detail, but we want to know down the track what worked, what didn't work. If we just planted everything and didn't know what was what, we couldn't learn from the results. We wouldn't be able to sort of say, oh well, Fifield is doing better than Griffith, or Mathura is doing a lot worse than the local provenance and things like that. So it's really gives us a lot of information. We're very keen for universities, anyone who wants to work on it to have access to that to that information as well, so they can utilise that information, and hopefully the payback will be that they give us information too, look the sort of work that they do. So hopefully things like genomic work and physiology work would be ideal to complement what we're doing.
Yeah, so talking about the genomics, I know that you were also planting local provenance again back into the site. So what were you sort of hoping in terms of maybe the cross-pollination between the dry scape provenance and the local provenance? Was that a part of the design of the project?
Yeah, yes, definitely. And look, it's partly because it's part of the experiment. You obviously want to be able to compare, well, are we doing better or worse compared to what was growing here anyway? And so that's our way of checking. So planting the local provenance is important just for that aspect of it. But also what we're very keen to do is when we collected seed from these different locations, we couldn't get the grey box don't grow on the same type of geology. They don't grow on the same topography as Nardoo Hills. So they're not entirely, we don't expect them to be entirely better suited than the local provenance. And so what we're hoping is that as all these trees grow up on these experimental sites, they'll cross-pollinate with the local provenance. And so we'll get, if you like, the genetic benefits of the non-local provenance mixing with the benefits of the local provenance, so the adaptation to soil types and things like that, mixing together, and the offspring will probably actually be the most important outcome of the whole experiment, if you like. So we don't only expect to sort of be monitoring for the next decade or two. It's actually going to be many decades into the future, looking at how things change. And so again, looking at having that genetic information now of what we've put in and what succeeds down the track when these crosses occur, I think would be really interesting and important work to be done. But not by the likes of me, not an ecologist. There'll be people in that sort of genetics field.
Yeah. So if you could come back in about 20 years' time or 30 years' time, what would you hope to see on those plots, with this project?
Yeah, I would love to hope that in a decade or two, hopefully not two, but less, to see some of those offspring germinating in between the ones that we've planted there. So we expect attrition. There's already attrition going on there. What we would expect to see is uh, after probably 5, maybe 10 years, the plants that we put in now will be mature enough, they'll be flowering, so the cross-pollination can occur, and then hopefully there should be enough space and hopefully the right conditions for germination to occur for that next generation. And I think I'll be so happy to see that pardon me, occurring. But I think that what I want to see also is us utilising, or everyone in that local area being able to utilise those, not only the plants we have planted now, but also those new seedlings, using that as a bit of a seed orchard for the local area. So Karakara, Wedderburn area, or Central Victoria, that seed stock is going to be very valuable, I suspect, into the future. One of the big issues we had with this project was been actually out having trouble collecting seed from those areas in New South Wales and South Australia as well, even locally actually. But they were under quite severe drought at the time in New South Wales. I can't see that getting any better in the future, and the drought conditions being more frequent. So setting up seed orchards, having a secure supply of seed from different provenances, not just for our region, but for everyone else, I think is going to be very, very important. So, pardon me, the more these sort of seed orchards that are set up, the better. The sooner we do it, the better.
So it sounds like this has got significant implications across other bush heritage properties or in other regions and by other organisations. If we can show that this approach works, it seems to have, potentially some quite far-reaching sort of benefits for trying to maintain ecosystem function in some of these struggling landscapes.
Yeah, I think that's right, and we do a lot of restoration work on bush heritage reserves. Scottsdale is a classic example where you can't buy a property without cleared land on it in that sort of area. So we bought protected beautiful areas of yellow box again and apple box and grasslands, but there was a lot of areas which were cleared, which we were revegetating back to those different ecosystems. And so this information should and needs to be applied there too. We've started down that track, but our earlier plantings didn't take that into account. But I think that's the information and the ideas have been evolving so rapidly that but we need to get onto doing that more regularly. But again, replanting with local provenance and keeping a close eye on any unforeseen outcomes. I'm not saying, I doubt if there are any really risky sort of things with doing this, but just in case there are, we obviously need to also be able to identify what we've done and be able to identify local from non-local provenances when we do these plantings. But it's I think going to be a very good strategy in the long term, and something we're going to have to do more and more. As you know, Kate, we're doing a lot of work in that climate change area about where our what the climate predictions are, what the implications are in each of our priority landscapes that we work on, and they look quite scary at times. So I can't see this being anything but essential for us to do, and not just in terms of re-veg like at Scottsdale, but I think also if unfortunately if dieback occurs also on other properties too, and I keep my beady eyes open for those early sort of signs of that occurring. Just here in Tasmania, the Liffey Reserve, our first reserve, that you can already sort of see some of the trees there are affected as as well. They sort of got this what we call orange syndrome, where the bark on the trees cracks open, and basically the manna, if you like, this sap sort of runs out of them and changes this beautiful white bark to an orange colour. So it's happening in a lot of places. As we mentioned right at the very start, the Dead Tree Detective project is gathering a lot of information about how widespread it is, and it is certainly occurring elsewhere.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. That was some fantastic information. I actually learned quite a lot there, which I was not aware of. So that was brilliant. We've now got some time for some questions from our participants. So if we have, we've got some questions coming through. So the first one is, will you be comparing the planting plots with plots of non-intervention, where there's been no odd provenances?
Yeah, so my hope is that we're already engaging with some physiologists from Melbourne University and other universities in Victoria. The aim would be to get them to work on not only looking at that experimental area and the different provenances we put in there, but to also look at what is happening to the natural bush on the Nardoo Hills property as well, so adjacent areas to the experimental plots as well. I think we still need to. We're still. The scientist in me says we don't have conclusive proof that climate change is what's killed those trees. I think we can rule out majority of the other possibilities of causes of dieback on that area, but I still would like definitive evidence from a physiologist putting gadgets on the trees to look at leaf water potential in the canopy, in the trunks, and things like that to actually show this is what's happening, this is what's killing those trees. Same sort of instruments can be used to look at how well those different provenances are doing relative to the local provenance, both, and ideally you'd compare them against the seedlings that the local provenance seedlings that we put in, not sort of comparing little seedling to big gigantic mature tree from Nardoo Hills Reserve. So comparing like for like, but also being able to look at the as I said, the adjacent undisturbed sort of areas as well.
That's great. Yep. Now our next question is, did you use a special GPS to be able to obtain really accurate tree locations?
Ooh, we didn't, because we were reliant on seed collectors, so we didn't have a differential GPS. But the accuracy of GPS these days is basically plus or minus 5 meters, and the types of trees that were collected from are generally not isolated trees. They're sufficiently spread apart that you'll be able to locate which tree it is when you revisit there. I think Gary actually went back to look at one of the sites, and he had a little bit of trouble with one or two trees, I think, but by and large he was able to go right to the tree and find it again, which is great. But yeah, unfortunately, sometimes we had professional seed collectors, we had amateur people also helping us where we couldn't get hold of an expert, a contractor who does that sort of thing for a living. So it's, yeah, unfortunately that was a little bit hit and miss in very few occasions, but I'm confident we'd be able to find 95% of those trees, which I think that's fabulous. Yeah.
That's pretty good. Yep. Now that question actually came from Richard. Sorry, Richard, I didn't mention that. And our first question came from Colin. So one comes from Jacinta. Do you know if the soil conditions between the source site of the seedlings and Nardoo Hills are roughly the same?
Yeah, no, that unfortunately isn't something which is 100%. As I mentioned, that's one of the reasons why, part of the reason why I'd like to see the cross pollination occurring, and I don't think that we're going to get. There is a risk that you bring the non-local provenance into Nardoo Hills and that they don't succeed because of things like poor adaptation to that particular soil type. often when we go to the grey box sites in New South Wales, they're often occurring on sort of alluvial flat sort of country. So it's quite different to the grey box sites on Nardoo Hills, which are on more hilly country and rocky hilly country. So wherever possible, we told seed collectors to get seed of both species from this type of location. So a rocky hill, if there's a rocky hill with grey box on it. But sometimes beggars can't be choosers. So we basically did have to get some of the seed from some of those trees as well. So it's very tricky. At the moment, the very preliminary results, like 1 or 2 years worth of data, doesn't suggest that there's any issues with. There's no issues, I think, with there's no massive sort of difference between growth and survival of the different provenances of each species. There are subtle differences at this stage, and maybe that will play out over time, of course, too. Interestingly, I don't think in both cases there aren't sort of significant differences between the non-local and the local provenance, again, at this early stage. But the local provenance generally tends to be in the poorer group, if you like, so lower height and poorer survival compared to the others. But that's a pretty gross generalisation at this stage. So don't hold me to it.
That can be sort of encouraging soon, you know, when we get a little bit more information. That's sort of encouraging. It's an encouraging thing.
Yeah.
So we'll just take one more question. Thank you. We're nearly out of time. And this question comes from Meredith, who said, when you plant out seedlings, what sort of spacing will you use to ensure they thrive? What is the natural spacing that exists now?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. It was a tricky one also for us to incorporate into the design. So we talked to people from Greenfleet who set up who do biodiverse plantings, not sort of plantation sort of style, dead straight rows, maximum production sort of thing. They're looking for longevity as well, so not a 20-year rotation or anything like that. So we did settle on a 4 by 4 metre spacing for those trees. We knew that we were going to get attrition, so we aren't expecting what we've planted to become the new stocking rate, if you like, tree density into the future. So already we've got some pretty severe attrition going on in some blocks, which is a worry, but nonetheless, we've still got good numbers of plants left in those areas as well to still continue the experiment, of course. But the planting is not. We didn't plant as if it was a woodland, so we didn't have the sort of wide spacing of sort of 30 metres or 20 metres between from tree to tree. We, as I said, we did sort of 4 by 4. But when you actually look at what occurs naturally on Nardoo Hills with regeneration, you often get incredibly dense regeneration. Like you'll have a large old tree surrounded by a circle of young regeneration, and that young regeneration can be several saplings per metre square, so huge density compared to what we've used, but certainly not what you'd expect if everything survived, what a woodland would look like. In fact, that would be a thicket rather than a woodland. Yeah, so there's very attrition.
Yeah, we're pushing up against the time now. So
Sure.
just to reassure people that if there were additional questions that we haven't been able to get to, we will respond to those in the next few days and send you the answers to those questions. We'll wrap up now. I just want to thank you, Matt, so much for explaining that to us. It's been just brilliant. And thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar live. It's been so lovely to have you out there in Cyberland. And remember, we will be emailing you the webinar link quite soon in the next few days. And we would love you to share that with people who you think are interested either in this particular project or in the work of bush heritage generally. It would be wonderful. So before I just give Matt a moment to give us some finishing remarks, perhaps just reflecting on this year, Matt, and what you're hoping to see in 2021.
Yeah. So finally, last year we got our last seedlings. Pardon me. We got the last seedlings in the ground. So that was a huge sigh of relief to have that happen. Now it's basically sit back, monitor, and see what the results are. Also, still keen to our local ecologist Julie Radford's also going to be going back to look at monitoring the areas where the dieback has occurred. So not every single plant dies in those areas, and I'm really still quite keen to see how those plants are going, how they cope with 2019, 2020 summer as well, because that was when I said 2008, 2014 were really severe heatwave years. 2019 was double again, not just double, so quadruple what our normal is. So I'd be keen to see what happens there. And I don't know whether we can write off the trees that are in those areas at this stage. I'd be love again for somebody who works on anatomy, physiology to actually look at the regrowth, look at that coppicing vegetation, and see whether have those plants actually adapted themselves to producing things like thicker cell walls on the xylem, the water transport vessels, and things like that. It's possible the experiment and ongoing monitoring, I think, are really vital approaches to ongoing management of Nardoo Hills. We shouldn't just sort of think, oh, put all our eggs in one basket. We've still got to look at what innate sort of adaptation there is in the local species there, but also hedge our bets a bit and go down this pathway of the climate adjusted provenancing.
Fantastic.
So I think we're well on the way. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you again, Matt, so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have you there with all your experience and knowledge of this project. It's a very exciting thing to be doing. Thank you. So just to finish up now, I'd just like to remind you that Bush Heritage is committed to healthy country protected forever. We're operating right across Australia and we'll continue to do so. And none of this would be possible without our supporters, whether you're supporting us through your financial contributions or through your volunteering or through providing expertise to our teams. We could not do this without you. So you are as much a part of Bush Heritage as the rest of us. So thank you. Thank you so much for all your support of us and what we're doing. And thank you again for joining us. It's been lovely to have you with us today. My name is Dr. Kate Fitzherbert. On behalf of Bush Heritage Australia, we look forward to connecting with you again on the next webinar for the 2021 series. So thank you again. Until then, stay safe. See you then. Bye.
There's no one like you. You rip apart the clouds in all my dreams. Others all